Hello, so welcome back subscribers, and here's some more delicious goodies for you. Today I'm going to show you a pinwheel. Now, pinwheel made of half square triangles, and a pinwheel is actually one of my favourite go-to blocks when I want something that's a bit more interesting than just squares and I need it in a hurry. And actually there's one hanging behind me right there. So that is a particularly funky pinwheel that I made recently to show off these amazing animal prints. But a pinwheel basically is a triangle that meets in the middle of the block. So this is the one that we're going to make, and I'm using half square triangles to make this one, but you can also make pinwheels with all sorts of triangular shapes. They just need to meet in the middle. So I'm going to be using half square triangles, which is basically a square, half of which is a triangle. So there are 45-degree angles, and you've got right angles in the corners here, and they all meet in the center. One way to make your half square triangles is using a right angle ruler like this one. They come in various sizes, and they often have a black tip at the top like this one, or a flattened edge like this one, and that actually takes into account that this angle here, the sort of 45-degree angle, because of the way trigonometry works, a quarter of an inch this way is slightly larger than a quarter of an inch this way. So just cutting from point to point like this would give you an accurate quarter of an inch. So what we have is we have that little tip across the top, and we have that little flat end here, and I'm just going to show you how that works. So this is a 6.5 inch wide strip, because we want our blocks, when they're all sewn together, we want this half square triangle to finish at 6 inches. So we add ½ an inch onto that, which means we cut our strip at 6.5 inches. So I'm going to first of all straighten up my outside edge just here, and we do that by running our rotary cutter up the side there whilst keeping that needle on the bottom. Then we rotate our fabric. You'll notice here that I've got my 2 strips already right sides together. That means that I'm going to cut them, and they will be ready to go straight into the sewing machine like this, because we will actually be working with bias edges. And bias means there's stretch, and we want to handle these as little as possible once we've cut them. So for a pinwheel block, we're going to need 4 sets of half square triangles. So what you would do is you take your piece, and I'm laying my flat edge along the top edge of the fabric, and then I've got my line down here, so everything's nice and straight. You see there's my first pair. So that's the first edge. What we want to do now is rotate it, okay? Because we need to cut another one here. If I'm working this way, which I can, my tip will hang over the edge. When I've got it this way, the flat edge goes up to the edge. It doesn't really matter, but what you do have to remember is to keep rotating, and now this raw edge here, or the cut edge, lines up with the diagonal line on my ruler, and I cut 1, 2, and you continue along your strip. Sometimes they drift a little like that. I'm going to continue along my strip. And you cut as many sets as you need. So I've got 1, 2, and in this case, I just managed to get 1 more set out of this piece. And there we go. We've got our 4 sets. So we would now take these to the sewing machine. So I've set my seam allowance to 1/4 inch, and I'm going to pop my first set of half square triangles under the sewing machine foot, and using the edge of the foot as my guide, that's going to run along that pair of triangles. You can pin them, or you can just reposition them if they move. And then when we get up to the end, I'm going to hold with my little set of tweezers. And then I'm going to grab my next set and pop that underneath. And then stitch onto the next pair. This is called chain piecing. This makes everything a lot quicker. So this is one method of making your half square triangles. We just snip them apart. And we have our pieces. So another method for making half square triangles is the square method, which this is good if you haven't got a right angle triangle like that. So with this particular method, we actually need to leave a bigger seam allowance all the way around. With the cut method, we add 1/2 inch. With this method, we actually need to add 7/8 of an inch, which is basically an inch minus one of those little tiny notches that you have on your ruler. So that'll be an 1/8. But personally, I always choose to round up and use the whole next inch. So I needed to finish at 6, so I'm going to cut mine at 7 instead of 6 7/8, and then it gives me a little bit of leeway for trimming down. So what we do first of all is we take our square, and I have my 2 fabrics right sides together. This is actually going to make 2 sets in one go. So for our pinwheel, you would only need 2 of these to make 4 half square triangles. So I've got them right sides together, which is pretty sides together. I'm going to get my ruler from one side to the other, and I'm going to draw a line. Now, I'm making it a very dark line here so that you can see it, but a pencil line will be fine. It's actually not going to be visible anywhere, so you could use wash away or air dry lines if you want to, but it's really up to you. So this is going to be our center marking, and we're actually going to stitch 1/4 inch either side of that line. All right, so we'll run a line of stitching down that side and down this side, and then we'll come back and I'll show you how to finish it. So as you can see, I've stitched either side of my line. I've used black here just so that you can see it, but you would use a much lighter colour. And now I'm going to cut my 2 pieces apart. And you'll see that I've got 2 sets of my half square triangles ready to be pressed. Because I've gone with the 7 inch option rather than the 6 7/8, I could actually need to trim these down a little bit. Trim them down once they're pressed. And if I place my ruler on top with the diagonal line of my ruler perfectly aligned with the diagonal line on the block, you can see there is a tiny little bit of excess to trim away. Not much, but it's worth doing. And that means that I end up with a perfectly square piece with the corners of my block having the diagonal lines meeting perfectly. That's why I choose to round up. That's not much, but it is enough to stop your blocks lining up. So the next thing I'm going to do is press my blocks. Pressing your blocks. What we want to do is press our blocks in opposite directions. our half square triangles, because when it comes to putting our pinwheel together, it's going to make it a lot easier for everything to match up. But the first thing we want to do is take our iron and pop it onto the top of our block. This sets the seams. You don't want to add too much pressure because these are still bias edges and we don't want to distort them. Now we're going to press to the darker side, which means we've got the dark side or the pattern side facing upwards. I'm going to lift that up, and I just use the weight of the iron to push up against that seam, not pressing down. And you see what that's done is it has pushed everything to that side so that my seam is perfectly aligned with the back of that darker fabric. So I'll just show you that again. Press it flat to set the seam. Open it up. Then use the weight of the iron up against that seam to gently push it backwards. You don't want to press too hard because triangles like this, as I said, are on the bias and you can make them stretch. And there we have automatically placed our fabrics with the extra seam under the dark side. This is going to make it easier when we put them all together, which is what we're going to do now. So here we have all of our half square triangles, and we're going to make them into our pinwheel. So the easiest way to do this and make sure that you're getting it right is to lay the first one down with the second one on top so that they match, and then just rotate it by 90 degrees. That's what you want. And take your next one, put it on the top of the one that you've just done, and rotate it. And then we take our final piece, put it on top, and then rotate it, because the pinwheel rotates from the middle of our block. So what we'll then do is take this first piece here, these first two, put them right sides together. Now, because we pressed those seams in opposite directions, there's a little ridge on that side and a little ridge on that side, meaning you can actually push them up against each other and they will lock in place. You can also run your finger down that center line and it will put everything where it needs to be. So what we will do is we will take this, and this is now ready to go to the sewing machine with a 1/4 inch seam allowance on here, and we will do the same with the top piece, with this one, and we will sew down there and then we'll be back. And so here we are, we have our pinwheel almost constructed now. So I've sewn those two pieces together. Then we would take this, put the right sides together, and now we should be able to feel, because when you have sewn these two together, by the way, press under the darker of the two. So that one will go that way and that one will go that way, enabling you then again to lock these two seams in together with your fingers. But also this diagonal line here should lock in with the block underneath, and so should this one lock in with the block underneath there. Needs to come over slightly. There we go. I can feel that lock in there, and that should all be smooth. There should be no lumps and bumps in it. And if you're unsure, you can take from your pin stash a clip like this and clip where you think it's going to be, and then lift it out and have a look. And there we can see that my pinwheels actually meet up beautifully in the middle. So the final step is to take your completed pinwheel pairs to the sewing machine and sew all the way across here. This will actually finish at the 12.5 inch block, like all of the other blocks in this series, so that you can put them all together. So there we go. You've made your pinwheel now. So you've got to grips with half square triangles. Two different methods of making them, either with a square ruler or with a triangular ruler. Use whichever one you've got to hand, and then you can play around with these pinwheels. So I've created this pinwheel here, but I've actually made a smaller one as well. So I could actually replace one of the pieces of that pinwheel with another pinwheel There we go. These are actually, they will finish at the same size as that block, and they are made with 3.5-inch triangles. So if you're using your ruler method, you'd cut your strip 3.5 inches wide. If you were using the square method, you would cut them at 3 7/8, or if you're naughty like me, you'd actually cut them at 4 and trim them down, and then sew them together in the same way. And you can start playing with pinwheels too. Can't wait to see what you make. Bye-bye.